When you remove the cover on these machines, you realize there are many oiling points that actually don't correspond with the holes on the cover. So if you look on the shafts, you'll have holes like this, but also look, this one, the cam stack has a hole in the center. And there are other points. This is another hole in the center. The cam bracket here also has a hole in there. But let's just flip the machine and you'll see underneath there are more holes. So these are holes, lubricating holes. From my perspective here is the machine needs to be on the side, because this is kind of a vertical hole when the machine is on the side, and that's how you lubricate. Just put droplets here. The brackets or the support for those shafts, these are really the most important part to lubricate. So there is another hole in there, and also just get actually you can use perhaps even a needle to get an idea how deep that thing goes. Just drop a needle in there and rotate the machine and feel the tip of the needle. So let's try to do this with one hand. I'm putting my finger on the needle, and I just put a slight amount of pressure and I rotate the machine. And you notice actually the needle on this one even goes up and down. So it does touch the rotating part, and can do this test if you want even on the brackets of the shafts. Just keep a finger, put a slight amount of pressure and rotate, and you will see the needle tip will just kind of drag, bang, rotating with the shaft. So these are lubricating points that you need to be really aware, because these are really important. This one, it's a special model, has kind of a weak lubricating wick. You need to put a few droplets on this small red pad to lubricate the shuttle. Don't forget the end of these rods, there is also movement there, so a droplet of oil right at the end. Actually, this is like an inner rod and an outer rod. The outer rod will just rotate very slightly, but that's enough to cause wear inside. So you want to apply a droplet right in between here at the end point of the outer rod. Actually, there is no need to apply on the other end of the bolt of the nut, but here, look on the other side here, in between these two, right there. So all these are really rotating points, friction points. So it's very important. This one, it's lubricated over there, but there is another rotating point here and another one there, and so on and so on. I want to show you the location of what's called worm gears, because those gears need a very light grease. So make sure you use a light grease. Happens to be for bicycles, this one, but you need to lubricate those gears, and they are very difficult to locate. I also have a Singer 401, and that one has a big stock and the worm gear underneath. For that one, I suggest removing the stock and access to grease the gear. Let's just look here at the front. We have the small cam stock, and I want to warn you that it's very difficult for me to film this correctly, but I'll do my best. So perhaps you can see, let me just handle the flashlight. Perhaps you can see the tiny gear right there, and the mating surface where I'm going to point right now. This is a worm gear. So the worm gear goes actually along the shaft. It's kind of a gear, if you want, linear gear placed right on the shaft. So when you rotate the shaft, the gear will just go like this. So what you see here, the sort of I would say greenish surface, this is the end of the worm gear on this front cam stock. There is a second worm gear which is even more difficult to see. You see this component here, it's sliding like this. You have a screw, you also have a lubricating hole. I talk about this lubrication hole, but you have a second hole which is actually also a lubricating hole, because underneath, let's see if I can get an angle. Yes, I think that's about as much as I can film it. Underneath, you'll see you have another vertical gear, so something that spins vertical like this, and that vertical gear, it's driven by another worm gear, which is, you see this shiny part, this is the shaft, and there is another worm gear on that shaft that's driving that small gear that's vertical. So the worm gear, it's horizontal, but the gear and the connected second gear, it's vertical in this situation. Now this one, it's extremely difficult to reach. What I will try to do is just get a wire, I will bend it as needed and try to slide it underneath there. And on this situation, I cannot even see the worm gear. So what I will do for this one, I would just put grease, a little bit of grease on that vertical gear, and I will rotate it a little bit, put some more grease, so not just at one point on it. Maybe you can use, if you can reach with a Q-tip, smear a bit of grease and rotate, and make sure you go all around the gear that you see, and hopefully that's going to spread it on the worm gear. I think you can see the very end of the worm gear at that point. So smear the gear that you see, but smell it all around, and turn the well to see the entire surface of the gear. In this situation, I will also perhaps just smear a bit of grease where I could see that gear, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit. This one rotates much slower. So that's how you want to do it. Or maybe I'm going to, let's see if I can reach with if you can actually reach for the worm gear itself. So this is the end of the splines on the worm gear. So let's just start to move the camera a bit. This is you can tell this is a spline. There is another one deeper. So if you can reach on the worm gear side, what you want to do is place a dab of grease at the connecting point between the worm gear and the second gear that's touching it, but put some grease in between them at the matting surface. And maybe easier for you is just turn the wheel a few turns one way and then a few turns the other way. So this way you are sure that grease will travel both ways on the worm gear and will cover the other gear that's connected to it as well, all around. That's the whole point. I would recommend trying to do this on any sewing machine when you got them used. I'm talking here about vintage sewing machines, because that grease on the worm gear will just, it's really old, will dry. Sometimes it gets gunk, depends what the previous owner did use. Maybe that person put a grease that's too viscose, too stiff, it will just harden on the gears, and that can be a problem and difficult to remove. But at least give it some fresh grease, and it's another maintenance, once perhaps or twice in a lifetime of the machine, but it's something not to forget about it if you want to get correct lubrication. And like I said in other videos, look for these tiny holes. These are lubricating points, and these almost never correspond with the cover holes, the holes on the cover. The cover holes are mostly for the shaft holes, but there are many other points. You may look around. Anyhow, there are many other points. I do have a video about that, a separate video that you want to lubricate correctly. Okay, so this is for this model, but I'm pretty sure you will find this kind of worm gears on many, if not most, sewing machines. This is just like an example for you. Thanks for watching. So again, you can tell the worm gear is right there. If I will turn it, you see the shaft is turning, and perhaps you can see a bit of old grease on the gear. There you have it. That's a bit of old grease, but at this point in life it's no longer really properly lubricated. So don't forget these holes here, look around them. And I do have another video where I show, if you want to do a deep lubrication, which I do advise when you got a vintage machine. So you never know the story of that machine, but you see there's about 50 to 100 pivots. So the metal will just rotate against other metallic parts, and this one it's another pivot, this one it's another pivot, this one it's another pivot. Obviously it depends on the model. Another pivot, another pivot. I would say just get droplets of oil. You see this pivot here, obviously a pivot has two ends and sometimes a middle. Put droplets at the ends, one droplet in the middle, another droplet. So lubricate all these tiny areas at both ends of a pivot. Try to find the right angle so the oil drops really on the pivot itself. For inside here, also camera now is not going to show you the mystery, but I like to use a straw like this. Just usually I think in Canada you no longer see this in stores, except for the dollar stores. For some reason you can still buy the straws. So put the oil tip here and just leak a droplet and aim at the pivots that are deep inside. And at the top, of course, you have a lot of pivots. So again, lubricate all these pivots when you get the machine. Just put, obviously now I have a cap on it, so put a droplet of oil. You may want perhaps to put the droplet of oil right around the stop screw. It will just leak inside most of the time. So also you may want perhaps to use your hand, just actuate to locate all the pivots. You see these two parts, for example, that move there. Well, the pivot is right underneath. If I have a wire, the pivot is going to be right underneath. So try to look, maybe grab a magnifying glass. And also, like I show you, you can use a wire with a droplet of oil on it, or I do recommend one of these. These are called medicine droppers. Got two from the dollar stores. Careful, these ones happen to be glass, so careful not to break it. So you just put that droplet at the rotating parts pivot. So again, you see this one here needs some oil right around the screw, but also look at the other end of the pivot and drop a droplet there. I would say one droplet for each end of a pivot, that's enough. So you don't want to leak that oil inside the machine. Don't forget these holes. You see there is a screw here. Do not touch the screw, but you will find another hole. And again, if you get a needle and you drop the needle in there, and you put your finger at the top of the needle and spin the well by hand, you will feel the tip of the needle. Sometimes it's just a slight movement. Don't be afraid, you are not going to damage anything, and you will feel that the tip of the needle moves. So shaft holes are, in my opinion, are one of the most important parts. The other important parts are around here, and again there are so many rotating parts. So obviously look closely and put a droplet of oil at each end of the rotating part, at each end of the pivot. Sometimes you also have a small hole to put a droplet inside, so look carefully. This is one of the holes, lubricating hole. There is another one there. I think the balancer, the black piece, also has hole in it. Something like that. So make sure you put the hole in there. It's another very important part because you have a lot of friction. It's a big component. Put a droplet of oil in between the shaft and the balancer. The balancer is this black piece that's heavier and it's reducing vibrations at speed. Obviously, droplet of oil. This is the presser foot. So you have perhaps more droplets in that area. And sometimes, for instance, this is where the needle is. It depends on the system. You may want to incline the machine and apply a droplet at the very top of that mechanism. So look very carefully, very closely, and really we are talking about vintage machines. Vintage means the oil that was at the factory did evaporate in time. It's too long time, decades. So just dropping here, it's, in my opinion, a big mistake. It's really, and I mean really, not enough. These are supposed to correspond to some more important lubricating areas, but it's definitely, for a vintage machine, 50, 40, 60, 70 years old, is definitely not enough to aim only on the cover holes. And also you will have some areas such as this one that moves like this, may want to put a bit of grease. I use myself bicycle grease. Why? Because this grease is very soft, it's not sticky, it doesn't harden, so it's a light grease, but it's not oil. So maybe you can find something more specific for sewing machines, but I would say some places do need a very small amount of grease. Get a Q-tip and just smear the surface. Don't put a dab of grease, just a very light smear. So these are kind of a secret areas, if you want. I call them secret because I think if you read the owner's manual showing you only the top holes and maybe some of the holes underneath, it's definitely not enough for an old vintage machine to have it spin, have a proper speed, to have it run a good speed without vibrations. So that's something you may want to be aware. I'm not talking about machines that you just purchased from the stores. I'm talking about vintage here. That's perhaps that requires a different treatment to have them work close to the original operating speed and functionality. Thanks for watching.